this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Pursuant to the order of reference of March 24, 2026, the committee will continue its study of Bill C-235, an act to amend the criminal code increasing parole ineligibility. We will proceed to clause-by-clause study in the last hour. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Sound tests were done successfully. Yes. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, French, or English. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, raise your hand. For members on Zoom, use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. First hour appearing we have as an individual is Joanne Landolt. From the Office of the Federal Ombudsman for Victims of Crime, we have Dr. Benjamin Roebuck, Federal Ombudsperson for the Victims of Crime. And from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, we have Dale Weidman, Superintendent, and Simon Otier, Legal Counsel. So the floor is open for opening statements for up to 5 minutes. And Ms. Landolt, I'll start. Oh, before we get going, Ms. Latanzio has something she would like to address.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you know, a notice motion was filed, and a motion was also, my understanding, the clerk has distributed the motion in both official languages with which I would like to read. That pursuant to Standing Order 97.1, the committee requests an extension of 30 sitting days to consider Bill C-223, an act to amend the Divorce Act, referred to the committee on Wednesday, February 4th, 2026. That the committee requires additional time to hear from witnesses and complete its study of the bill, and that the chair report this request for an extension to the House.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion? Yes, everybody? Okay, motion carried. Unanimous, thank you. I thought it was implied. Thank you. Okay, so apologies. So Ms. Landolt, we'll give the floor to you for up to 5 minutes.
Okay. Hello. My name is Joanne Landolt, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. March 18th, 2010, my niece Kimmy Proctor, 18, was lured, repeatedly raped, and murdered by two of her peers, Cruz Wellwood, 16, and Cameron Moffat, 17, at Wellwood's home in Langford, outside Victoria, BC. The following day, they transported her body on a public bus in a hockey bag to a local creek where they staged and lit her on fire. 3 months to the day, Cruz and Cameron were arrested. 6 months later, they pled guilty, and the statement of facts detailing her horrific murder was revealed. Being youths at the time, their names were withheld until they were sentenced as adults. Being sentenced as adults, you'd think my family wouldn't have any parole notifications for at least 25 years, but that wasn't the case. As a registered victim, shortly afterwards, we received letters from Corrections Canada stating parole dates: UTA, June 18th, 2018, DP, June 18th, 2018, and FP, June 18th, 2020. Our family was in shock from Kimmy's murder, and to have this notification with dates only 8 years later, it took us by surprise. Even though we knew that those were the dates, it still took us back. We learned that the boys, as we call them, our offenders, were known to police, their school, peers, and the community as being very troubled, and their violent tendencies had been escalating, resulting in Kimmy's murder. They had tried to lure another girl that evening to do this again. Unfortunately, she did not accept their invite to come over that night. Teachers and school officials said that they couldn't do anything to stop, school officials said that they couldn't do anything about their behavior. Nothing was in place to deal with them. They hardly went to school. They stayed home, smoked weed, played video games, and visited inappropriate websites. Everyone basically stood back and watched them spiral out of control. After Kimmy's murder, I dove into a mode of trying to prevent someone else from going through what happened to Kimmy and try to spare another family from this nightmare. I started researching school safety programs and found one developed by the Canadian Centre for Child Protection in Winnipeg, Kids in the Know. I circulated around BC Lower Mainland and South Vancouver Island guest speaking, mainly for the school district's erase bullying training sessions and advisory councils. I was able to help fundraise to purchase the program, bringing it into training sessions, bringing it into multiple schools. Our family helped develop Kimberley's Law with federal and provincial points of prevention and accountability for troubled youth. This spearheaded the risk assessment protocol, which was implemented in BC schools, and the Safe Care Act, which is a mandatory counseling and treatment for youth who pose a risk of self-harm, violent behavior, drug addiction, and/or sexual exploitation. The Act has been presented numerous times in the BC legislation, and we are optimistic that in some form it will be put in place for youth to receive the help they need. I am also part of the Pacific VAC, Victim Advisory Council, where I've met many federal victim ombudsmen, including Benjamin, and I've had great opportunities with the VAC, meeting people and being able to share Kimmy's story. Being involved in these enabled my family to share Kimmy's story and meet many organization representatives and government officials. But most of all, we are gathering awareness. We are a regular family. Kimmy didn't live a risky lifestyle. If this can happen to my family, to be honest, it could happen to anyone's. My family has attended multiple hearings, one just last fall, and we've submitted many victim statements for both our offenders. These are very difficult. I would never have imagined the stress it would have on us with statements, putting feelings into words, what to and what not to write. Do we just want to submit them? Do we want to read them or have someone else read them for us? In the beginning, it would take me at least 1 month to complete one statement. Then I couldn't put myself through it anymore. Short and sweet is what I said to myself, and just to submit them, and until I had to be warranted that I need to really put my true all and big effort into it to stop one of our offenders from being released. I'm not going to go through the mental strain of going through a month to write 2 pages of words. For hearings, preparing mentally, emotionally, traveling from Vancouver Island to the mainland, overnight stays, security clearances, listening to the parole board and offenders speak, answering questions, listening to their behavior before the crime, and after, and while they've been incarcerated. Most of all, at these hearings, listening to the brutal murder of my niece. It is very stressful. My family attends not because we think there's a possibility that they will be released. We do it for Kimmy, to be her voice. Letting the parole board know how much she is loved, missed, and how her brutal murder has impacted us. I've said many times, why do we need to go through this, the stress, the trauma? Not only is it a waste of time for us, but also our system. and the cost factor of those hearings. Our offenders are not at a point of their sentence that they will get any type of parole.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up quickly, Ms. Landau.
Okay. We've heard this from many at the hearings, so there's no positive outcome. I know it is difficult to understand victims' needs, and even when years go by, for us is like the crime happened yesterday. At times it is in the back of our minds, but other times it is right in our thoughts that we can't shake. The implementation of Bill C-235, Respecting Families of Murdered and Brutalized Persons Act, would spare victims from receiving unnecessary hearing notifications, the stressful task of writing more frequent statements, and attending pointless hearings that re-traumatize. It won't take the pain of losing a loved one. It won't take the pain of losing a loved one to abduction, sexual assault, and murder, but it will ease and some redundant stress. My family fully supports this bill and hope that it will be put forward, preventing other families from harmful repercussions of hearings.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing that personal story. Dr. Roebuck, over to you for up to 5 minutes. Apologize, we have a technical problem, so just bear with us for a moment.
Be your neighbor on the other side now. Thank you.
All right, you can start over again, Dr.
Okay,
Roebuck.
thank you. I'd like to acknowledge Joanne again for your testimony, acknowledge Kimberly's family and other families who have worked so hard and advocated for this bill to come before committee. We're on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I begin there because this discussion is about more than sentencing. It's about whether families whose loved one's life was taken through violence can encounter justice systems that respond with dignity, safety, and care. That question is especially important for Indigenous families who have too often had to fight to have their loved ones seen, named, protected, and remembered. The Office of the Federal Ombudsperson for Victims of Crime receives complaints from victims about federal departments and agencies, including the Correctional Service of Canada and the Parole Board of Canada. We don't review the merits of parole board decisions to grant or deny release, but we do review how victims and their families experience the federal parole process and where systemic barriers cause preventable harm. Bill C-235 responds to real harm. I support action to reduce unnecessary cycles of re-traumatization for families affected by these serious offenses. Once parole eligibility begins, families may face mandatory parole reviews every 2 to 5 years, sometimes for the rest of the offender's life and sometimes for the rest of their own. The impact on families is not limited to the hearing itself. It's the repeated cycle of notice, preparation, fear, postponed hearings, and renewed exposure to what was done to their loved one. Bill C-235 recognizes this type of harm. Delaying the first parole hearing may give some families a longer period of stability, safety, and distance from a process they experience as deeply painful. What we hear from families is that the harm of parole is not only about timing, although that matters, but the experience of the eventual hearing also matters. We reviewed 60 of our case files from 2019 to present related to the Parole Board of Canada. Families described the emotional labor of preparing victim statements, the uncertainty when hearings are postponed, waived, or changed, the difficulty of arranging travel, work leave, childcare, cultural supports, or emotional support, fear when protection concerns are not included in release conditions, frustration when they don't receive enough information to plan for their safety, and exposed when the intimate impact of the crime described in victim statements is shared with the offender. Some families value the opportunity to attend and speak. Others want distance from the process. Different families have different needs. That's why I would encourage this committee to view Bill C-235 as one part of a broader conversation, not the whole answer. If Parliament accepts that the repeated exposure to parole hearings can re-traumatize families, then the next question is how to reduce that harm before and after the parole eligibility begins. In practical terms, as the committee studies this bill, I'd like to highlight 3 issues. First, information. Families should receive clear information early. They should understand registration, parole eligibility, temporary absences, work releases, day parole, full parole, and what participation rights exist at each stage. A family should not discover too late that the parole eligibility date was not the first relevant release-related milestone. Second, timeframes. The committee can also consider whether longer intervals between reviews are appropriate in this narrow category of cases, while also safeguarding a meaningful possibility of release. And finally, complaints. Concerns raised by victims about their rights to information, protection, and participation under the Canadians Victims' Bills of Rights need to be supported by an effective complaints process. At its best, accountability helps systems listen and improve. The Federal Ombudsperson for Victims of Crime needs legislation or regulatory support to ensure our office can access the materials relevant to victim complaints about the parole process. This is not an argument, in closing, against the right to parole review. It's an argument for adjusting the frequency and management of those reviews so the system does not impose needless and foreseeable harm on people it is legislated to protect. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Roebuck. Okay, now over to the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. You have up to 5 minutes as well. Mr. Weidman, you look like you're ready to speak.
Yeah, thank you. As mentioned, my name is Dale Weidman. I'm a superintendent with the Vancouver Police Department, and with me as well as Simon Othier. He's legal counsel for our department, and we're appearing on behalf of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. Distinguished members of this committee, thanks first and foremost for the opportunity to address you today on Bill C-235, Respecting Families of Murdered and Brutalized Persons Act. It's a really important bill. The police's perspective, the police community's interests and efforts will always be directed towards preventing public harm. But if harm should occur, we are committed to do everything we can to ensure justice is served and to support victims and their families. The CAC believes in the importance of always being victim-centered and trauma-informed. Consequently, we support efforts to reduce the impact that multiple parole board hearings has on families, and this has already been mentioned by the previous 2 witnesses very eloquently. And these board hearings has on families where loved ones have to speak about these heinous homicides. So the CACP, we support Bill C-235 and the proposed amendment to the Criminal Code to provide judges with the discretion to impose a period of parole ineligibility between 25 years and up to 40 years for offenders convicted of abducting, sexually assaulting, and murdering someone in a single incident. Thankfully, while these incidents are rare, relatively rare, those crimes are particularly heinous and they have a serious impact not only for the victim's family, but the whole of the community. And this was particularly highlighted very well by Kimberly Proctor's aunt and the impact that it had on Langford. Denunciation and deterrence should be a primary consideration when addressing these crimes. The CACP supports the intent of Bill C-235 to ease some of the trauma that the families of the victims are facing during parole board hearings. At each parole board hearings that families attend, they are re-victimized by reliving the brutal details of how their loved ones were killed. While the law does not require victims or families of victims to attend a parole board hearing, it is easily understandable why they feel compelled to attend. Allowing judges to impose up to 40 years without parole eligibility would reduce the number of parole hearings a family might feel compelled to attend to make a victim impact statement. However, the CACP is conscious that this bill must strike a balance between the rights of the victims' families and the rights of the offenders. Therefore, the CACP is offering some proposed amendments that Simon will speak to.
Good afternoon. Regarding Section 12 of the Charter, they guarantee the right not to be subject to any cruel punishment and protect human dignity. We had the relatively recent decision in R versus Bissonnette, the Supreme Court of Canada, that warned against the imposing a sentence on the presumption that the offender is beyond redemption and lack the moral autonomy needed for rehabilitation. So the risk here is that a sentence of life imprisonment with 40 years of parole ineligibility could be perceived as being intrinsically incompatible with human dignity and therefore contrary to Section 12 of the Charter. The CCP is calling for some amendment to the bill in order to strengthen it and put it in a better position to be facing any challenges to this resolution. Firstly, we think that the provision should provide some clarification about the right to appeal for the offenders, specifically regarding to the right to appeal the ineligibility period. Secondly, the provision should provide some guidance on the consideration for imposing period of ineligibility that exceed 25 years. Perhaps this could take the form of providing some factor that the judge could consider as aggravating or consider in determining what is an appropriate period of ineligibility. Therefore, we invite this committee to consider amending the bill to strengthen it and put it in a better footing for any challenges that it might encounter in the future.
Thank you, Simon. Just in conclusion, the CACP supports the provisions of this bill and believe that the changes to the parole ineligibility would be beneficial to support the families of the victims of the most heinous crimes that can be committed in Canada. We believe the proposed legislative amendments will provide a victim-centered and trauma-informed approach to parole board hearings. Clear and concise clarifications could be introduced to strengthen the provisions and secured our commitment to support victims' families.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, we'll start the 6-minute round with Mr. Kibble.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here, and thank you for the members from VicPD and your input on amendments, and we're certainly open to considering those, and I think that will come in the line-by-line portion. I'd really also like to thank Joanne for your courage and for sharing your story and being here to support and most importantly speak on the impact of those parole hearings. And I know you've been advocating for many, many years, both education and other law reforms, but this ties almost directly to your case, although there were some minor changes. But the main focus is helping us best understand the impact that this bill will have. So maybe you could describe, and in your own words then, the parole hearing process, what it has meant for your family emotionally and practically. And I know we discussed a few points, but if you could share some of those, and I might remind you of some of the things we discussed.
As mentioned previously, it would take me a long time to write my statements. victim statements so I could read them in front of the parole board. And I just felt like I was just getting into a bad state, going over and over and over again, trying to figure it out what I should be submitting. So I decided just to submit them because they're, you know, it's not a point. They're not at a point of their incarceration that they would be eligible anyway for parole. To make it easy on myself, I just have been, you know, obviously putting something into it, but not putting my all into it. And as we discussed before, one of our parole hearings that we recently attended, we had a notification, I believe it was September or October, for the parole hearing to happen, I believe it was in December, and then it got delayed and delayed every few months. And eventually it did happen, but it was a year after our first notification. So we had this roller coaster. We would have a date. It should be done. We wouldn't have actual set dates, but okay, it should be in December. And then, oh, it should be in February. No, it should be in June. This happened for a year. So a year going up and down with your emotions, trying to get yourself mentally prepared for something was very difficult for myself. And I can imagine it was very difficult for my brother, my sister-in-law, especially. And as I said, too, you know, we live on Vancouver Island, my family. We traveled to the mainland for the hearings. And, you know, it's just the mental preparedness going over. And then actually our most recent hearing, there was technical difficulties at the hearing. So we went into the hearing where Cruz Wellwood was. His back is towards us. And there was issues with the audio. So then they had to take us out of the room and work on the audio, put us back in the room, and then back out again. And at this point, we're like, is this even going to happen? Are we going to have to come back? Is it going to get postponed? Luckily, they did get it figured out. So
Thank
it
you.
was.
I just wanted,
proceeded.
just another little quick question, and please accept, I think, all of our deepest sympathies what has happened to your family, and thank you for being such an amazing spokesperson for your family. I know it's such an impact on them that you've stepped up to a very, very difficult role. You've spoken about the timeline and the pressures leading up to, but in terms of, and I apologize if this is too sensitive of a question, and so without getting into too much detail, how you're feeling when you have to hear in the actual hearing itself while you're there with the offender in front of you and having to relive and give that voice for your family member who doesn't have a voice anymore. You're having to hear this stuff.
Well, our offenders aren't taking any accountability, so when they're talking about what they did with Kimmy, it wasn't a big deal. And it's pretty devastating when you hear that, especially coming from the person who took your niece and your loved one away like that. You know, and when they're talking, the offenders talking to the parole board and discussing things back and forth, it's just almost like surreal that you're actually hearing the way they're talking about your loved one. Mm-hmm. You know, there's definitely tissue in parole hearings, gasps, and almost, you know, just the nonchalant way of the offenders talking. It's it really does put you back.
Thank you. And when we were talking earlier today, you actually received a notification, and I could see your stress level, a notification on parole. I could see your stress level shooting up. Some people have suggested alternates to make the parole process better, including attending remotely, and yet you described to me during COVID you had to attend remotely. Could you maybe share if that is better or worse, or in terms of the impact on your family? It wasn't really better or for worse. It was, unfortunately, I did do a statement and it was videotaped, but the audio was horrible. And I felt that the parole board not being able to see you too, because they do face you when you do read your statement, they get the emotion that you're going through. And it's very hard when you're videotaping yourself and you're trying to just talk. It's not the same thing. Yeah. Thank you very much for your courage and your compassion and stepping up as a spokesperson for Kimmy and your family. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kibble. Ms. Begum, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to both of you. Thank you to all of you for being here today. And may I call you Joanne? Thank you very much. I'll start with Joanne. First, I just want to echo the words of MP Kibble and say thank you very much for the courage, for being so courageous to be here and share with us. And in a way, I almost felt guilty, and I think I share the sentiment with my colleagues, is that I almost felt like we're re-traumatizing you by asking you to also do the same and share your story again. So it takes so much out of you, and so thank you for being so strong, and I hope that you continue to have that strength to fight and the work that you're doing, especially with VEC. I can't imagine what you, your brother, and your sister-in-law have gone through and are continuously going through, and I really appreciate your willingness to help this bill. And there are times that the intention of certain laws that are passed does not really have the same effect. And I feel that when we talk about victim statements, there are times we speak of them as the perpetrators listening and maybe feeling a sense of guilt or rethinking of it, except what we're actually doing is the victims are reliving and re-traumatized by sharing and over. And I really appreciate what we're hoping to do with this, and I appreciate MP Kibble bringing this forward. I want to ask, what do you wish parliamentarians, and just kind of looking back at your experience and your family's experience, what do you wish that parliamentarians better understood about the impact these crimes have on victims' families, if there is anything that you'd like to share?
Crimes have had, or the actual hearings and sense?
So the probations, but first the crimes, and then obviously the process.
Well, obviously your world is torn upside down. Nothing is the same. I'm speaking as an auntie. I'm not speaking as a mother or a father. I can't imagine how it would be. But every holiday, every occasion, there's someone missing. In our case being a high-profile case, it was in the news quite a lot. A lot of talk. Victoria is now a larger city, but it's not. We've been there for decades and generations. We know a lot of people, so there's a lot of talk and stuff. And just like I said before about our offenders too, just knowing that their violence escalated, it's just unbelievable. It really is. Being able to hear that no one did anything to these monsters. They just were allowed to murder somebody in the way that they did. Yeah, it's very traumatizing, and it's something that you'll never outlive it. It's always there. And ultimately too, like you were saying, I don't mind speaking about this. I mean, yes, obviously I'm emotional, but I said very early on after Kimmy died that something good has to happen from Kimmy's death, and we need to make it happen, because no one can die in that brutal manner and nothing positive be, an outcome from it. There has to be. Someone can't just die like that for nothing.
Thank you, and I hope we are able to do something positive today and here and going forward from that as well. And my next question, and I'll ask Mr. Roebuck as well, and maybe if you want to chime in as well, Joanne. Dr. Roebuck, victims and families understandably want Parliament to act, and I hope that we're able to do this with this legislation. At the same time, Parliament has a responsibility, and you touched on your testimony, to have legislation that is legally sound and is able to withstand any court challenges. And you talked about having dignity and safety and care. From your perspective, how important is it that we get both of these things right when we pass this legislation?
Thank you. I have great respect for the need to balance, but I have sometimes a reaction to that word, because when we talk about balancing, we're often not actually fully unpacking the experience of survivors. What we hear is very similar to what Joanne has shared, that Once the eligibility dates start, it's normal that hearings are postponed. We had a complaint from a family that also meets the criteria of this bill, where they had 7 parole postponements in 2 years. And the whole time, they're experiencing post-traumatic stress symptoms. They're preparing in ritual ceremony in their community to come, and then it's moved and moved. And the impact is unfathomable. And so if we talk about balancing, the families are saying, can you consider this? What does it look like to balance our interests in this conversation?
And to follow up on that, because I want to make sure that we get it right. So if Parliament, can preserve the objective of this bill, Bill C-235, while it is, also improving its legal durability, transparency, and ability to withstand any challenge, would that generally be in the best, interest of the victims and their families?
I feel it would, definitely. It would give some families a sense of their new normacy. I can't say it's going to be, everything's going to be fine. I mean, it's always, like I say, going to be in the back of your mind, obviously, and mentally, physically impactful on you. But I believe that it would help families somewhat heal from their tragedies and heal, like I say, mentally and health-wise as well. It's physical and mental.
Thank you, Ms. Begum.
I think that sentencing is often the focus of measures to support crime victims, but the actual process from start to finish is within Parliament's purview, and there's a lot more work to do to have a process that's safer and preserves fairness for both sides.
Thank you. Mr. Fortin for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Roebuck. Thank you, Ms. Landolt, for being here today. Do you need interpretation? Can you hear me? Yep. I don't have questions to ask you, Ms. Landolt. I am without words. I have no words to talk about how I feel about what your niece went through. I won't be the first to tell you that it's not acceptable. It makes no sense. No parent should ever have to go through this. Having said that, it is obvious that we cannot go back in time and prevent acts like this from happening. All we can do is try to build a justice system that works, and that, to the extent possible, avoids the very situations that you had to go through. And when those situations happen, we need to be able to deal with them in a, I don't know if fair is the right word, in a fair way, in an effective way, to make sure that the people who committed these acts are punished for what they did. While at the same time, and perhaps you'll think I'm naive, but we should leave the door open to rehabilitation, especially when we're talking about young people. I retain some hope that they will retain enough humanity that they can be rehabilitated one day. Now, this isn't my specialty. This isn't my area of expertise. But I think there are people who can be rehabilitated. In the case of the murders of Kimberly, I'm not sure they will be rehabilitated, and I don't get that sense from what you've said. But this bill seeks to set out a 25-year to 40-year parole ineligibility period. And honestly, when I look at that, I don't know if something more than 40 would be something better than less than 25. I think in general we need to work on rehabilitation. And if someone isn't rehabilitated 25 years down the road, I don't really see any point of waiting an additional 15 years. Of course, we play with the cards we're dealt. Ms. Landolt, if you wish to add something to your testimony, perhaps you can give your point of view on the question of rehabilitation. Despite all you went through, all your family went through with the death of Kimberly, do you believe that criminals can be rehabilitated? And maybe the answer is no, and you are totally allowed to say that, but I would like to hear your remarks on that issue.
Well, the answer is no. Definitely not. These, I don't even call them people, because they're not people, they're monsters. They're evil. They're not treatable. And even the court documents prove that I believe it was like 25 years of intense therapy, possibly. We also heard castration. We heard multiple things. I can't even think it off the top of my head. But the amount of therapy that could possibly treat these two is not comprehensible. It's not able to be done. We have seen it. It's been 16 years, and we just had a hearing late last year, and just no accountability. They're both pointing the fingers at each other. They both mastermind this. There is no one leader. They both both planned this. It was a perfect storm. That's what the police officers told my brother and sister-in-law. They met at very young in age in school, and they just manifested into what they became. They would have, they said if that girl had come over after Kimmy's death, she would have gotten murdered. They were serial killers in the making. These people cannot be treated. There's certain people, certain offenders, they are not treatable. And these two are a perfect example of that. And there's obviously more. Clifford Olson. I grew up when Clifford Olson was doing his murders. I remember being scared to go out of my house because of it. There's Paul Bernardo. You know, there's multiple different murders out there that they're not treatable. That's just in their makeup. We need to put these people behind bars, and that's where they belong, because that is the safety of our communities. I do not want our offenders let out, and I'm telling you, if they ever get let out, they better be watching them, because they will reoffend. I guarantee you it.
Et s'il me reste du temps, je vous poserai la même.
If I have any time left, I will ask the same question to Mr. Roebuck. Would you like to say anything about rehabilitation?
Bill is quite narrow in scope with where it's looking to bring these restrictions. I think that within corrections, there's lots of different risk assessment tools and evaluations that are used that could suggest whether a parole hearing is even merited. If you have people that you know are not accepting responsibility who intend to cause harm, that's difficult to see a path forward.
Thank you, Mr. Fortin. We'll go into the 5-minute round. So we're going to have time for one person from each party, starting with Mr. Lawton for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all the witnesses in particular. And I mean, no offense to the other witnesses, but you, Ms. Landolt. I think it's incredible the courage and clarity that you've provided on something that is very personal to you and your family, but as we've heard in testimony from Mr. Kibble, also applies to other families. And not all of them have an advocate like you, so I think I speak certainly on behalf of this committee for how grateful we are and how in awe we are of what you have done here. And in the 15 years since you lost your niece, I was just hoping you could reiterate how many times you have had to appear before a parole board.
Wasn't coming up, but both of our offenders have gone to parole. Cameron, I believe it's only been one time that's actually been in hearing parole. Cruz has been 2 or 3 times, I believe. There's the paper hearings. There's also with the parole hearings, there's ETAs as well for personal development. And yeah, because Cameron, I believe it was only once with him.
At the risk of putting words in your mouth, too many to count.
Yeah, yeah.
Too many to remember how often you've had to relitigate and relive this. And you've said very eloquently in your testimony earlier that every time it takes a little piece of you to do it, basically, the amount of effort that it takes digging into that part of your life. When you've gone through this, has there ever been a thought in your mind that the parole application will be successful? Has that ever even been a question?
No.
So it is really serving no purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the offenders know this, and we've heard from other witnesses, and I've seen research on this. We had one witness at our last meeting talk about how offenders literally get off. Those were the words on this. Is that something you felt as well, where they almost enjoy that process and the effect they're having on people like you and your family?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And too, with my statements, you know, I have obviously said some personal information, but some of the information I have not said because I don't want them to feel gratification, because they do feel gratification because if they are hurting somebody, that's what they want to do. So I don't want them to know how much it's hurt our family. But I mean, I've obviously said it in a nutshell, but not dove right into it about hard feelings. And two, they do receive our statements as well, so they can read them at any time, and that bothers me. Yeah, it's kind of takes you back that they can actually go through and read this stuff, and and two, sorry, just with them too, like having control and trying to have control of even the hearings. They try to have control over the parole board as well.
Have you felt in the course of the last 15 years, I guess, that victims are not front and center in the system, that the system itself is not concerned predominantly with the effects of victims and their families?
No, I've been told that the prime outcome they want to release offenders. They want to treat them. They want them to be able to go out in society. That's what it is. It's not about us. I must say the parole board acknowledges us and understands that the trauma, and they do respect that we are present. They've said that. They understand it's very difficult to be there, very difficult to read statements or submit statements. But ultimately, the goal is to release offenders.
And when you say they, you're referring to the system. You're referring to the government, basically.
Yeah, and then the system is broken because, like I said before, if I don't want to see these two released. It's not in the best interest of any woman, any female, I would say, in Canada for these offenders to be released. So why it's taking lots of taxpayers' money for these hearings? It is not warranted. So and I've said that. Why are we doing this? It's ridiculous because there's a date. You know that because there are scheduled hearings that they have paper hearings that they have dates that they set when they are sentenced.
Thank you.
Regardless of how well they're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Ms. Latanzio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and particularly you, Mrs. Landolt. I know that sharing this yet again publicly is not easy. So I know that in your opening statement you said that something positive ought to come out of this, and do know that your presence here today and you helping us out doing this work is positive in itself. So thank you again for that. Thank you and your family. In your experience, the fact that there's the justice systems comes out only with a decision, in your opinion, if a decision is motivated or provides reasons, does that give you any more confidence in the system rather than just having a decision saying yes or no, parole is awarded or not? So, like the reasoning behind a decision, is that important for you? Yes.
Reasoning. I never wanted them to be paroled.
No, I understand either way, yes or no.
Yeah. But I think the reasoning, I mean, yeah, because in the parole hearings, you do hear how they are. Things come up all the time as to how they are now, and what maybe was happened when they were younger. Some information, we do get information from parole hearings. But reasoning, I mean, I believe the parole board knows that they're not at a point where they would get released. I don't really even think that if you say, do I feel that there should be a reason ultimately, I don't feel that they should be released, so any reason.
But do you feel that there's, like if a decision is motivated, it sort of like reinforces the confidence in the justice system because you understand the reasons?
That would be, yeah. I understand that, and I do feel that. I mean, if they have reasons, then they obviously know what's going on and what these offenders are really about. And they're like the last hearing we went to. Basically, they're just like, you're not fooling anybody. You're saying one thing, but then you turn around and you're answering the question, and you're contradicting yourself. They can see through the offenders, which is nice to know because I know offenders. They sometimes will put a mask on when they're in front of the parole board and to say what they want to hear, but sometimes people they mess up, and that's what our offenders do. They mess up because they say on paper that they're ready to get out, but then their actions and their words aren't saying that.
Okay.
I hope I answered that correctly or satisfactory for what you were wanting to.
Thank you. My next question is to you, Dr. Roebuck. We've heard during this study that supporting victims and ensuring strong legal safeguards are somehow competing objectives. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I'd like to say that I do believe in rehabilitation firmly, but I believe that there's signs of progress when that's happening. And so I think that that we have to give more space to considering the needs of victims and survivors in these processes, but we also need to have fairness in procedure. Fairness has to be applied all around.
So speaking of fairness, is it fair to say that legislation designed to support victims is ultimately strongest when it is both responsive to the victim's concern and structured in a way that reduces the risk of legal uncertainty?
Yeah, and that's why I'm inviting the committee to see this as part of the conversation and then to consider what are all those different ways that survivors are affected by the parole process, like postponements.
Okay. And based on your experience advocating for victims, would you encourage parliamentarians to adopt reasonable amendments that strengthen the legal framework of a bill, even those amendments that do not change the core objective of this bill?
Yeah, the bill has to be safe from constitutional scrutiny, and that's what's in the best interest of victims. So if there are procedural amendments to pass it in a more effective way, then that's in the interest of victims.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Lattanzio.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Fortin for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Roebuck, I will let you speak a little bit more about rehabilitation. You have the floor.
In our work, it's clear that there's overlap between serious victimization and serious offending, and we have to believe that survivors have ways to recover. I think that's different than the matters of this case, and I think that this conversation is fairly narrow in scope to a broader conversation on rehabilitation.
Dans le cas des...
In the case of the people who committed this crime, the crime involving Kimberly, Ms. Landolt said that there was no rehabilitation possible. When I look at the facts of the case, I would tend to agree with her, despite my tendency to want to believe in rehabilitation. I get the sense that it's just not possible in this case. So would you agree that there are cases where it's not possible? And if so, what do you do in those cases?
If there's no signs of rehabilitation and if there's no signs of progress and there's high risk and clear indications that they're not going to be changing their behavior, that we have to consider the impact on victims. The impact on the victims of participation.
Oui, mais je comprends, mais comme ça,
I understand. But I don't think we'll be able to fully console the victim's family. I mean, they went through something unimaginable, but what should we do as a society with people who commit such heinous crimes? What if they're young people? Do we just throw in the towel and give up on rehabilitation? We used to have a death penalty. We don't have one anymore. I'm sure you're against the death penalty, but then what do we do with these people? Do we just leave them behind bars their entire life? Do we give up on them? Is there something that could be done with people like this? I don't know. I'm a lawyer, but I don't have any expertise in rehabilitation. This is just not my area of expertise.
You can give a satisfactory answer in the time that we have.
Thank you, Mr.
Merci.
Fortin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Okay, we're going to, I want to thank all the witnesses for taking the time to be here. Ma'am, particularly you for, you guys done? Just want to thank the witnesses for being here today, particularly you for sharing this very, very difficult personal story. Committee, we're going to suspend for just a few minutes. With me here. We got every, 1, 2, 3. Oh, Dolly's back there. Yeah. Okay. Roman, just let us know when you're ready to go, okay? Okay, thank you. All right. We're happy to wait. Okay. So welcome to the second hour of the meeting. We'll proceed to clause by clause the study of the bill. With us to answer technical questions we have from the Department of Justice, a couple of familiar faces, Joanna Wells, Senior Counsel, Team Leader, Criminal Law Policy Section, and Aaron Kelly, Legal Counsel. Thank you for joining us again. So we will jump right in, and I will start with Clause 1. Shall Clause 1 carry?
No, Clause 1 is postponed because it's the...
No, I thought it was Clause 1.1.
Yeah, so you, new Clause 1.1, so you can say that Clause 1 is postponed, and so...
Okay, sorry, my apologies. All right, as I think I explained off the record, I'm having some visual challenges here, so just bear with me. So the G1 to G3, or the clauses up to G4 are dependent on the approval of G4. So I believe, based on my discussions earlier, we have unanimous consent to start with G4 and then go back to the beginning? Yes. Yes? Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Which is Clause 4. So G4, are they deemed moved? Do we need to? Okay, moved by Ms. Latanzio. Okay. Shall G4 carry? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So do I need to do Clause 4? I was just about to tell you that.
I would do Clause 4 as amended. And
Need a little patience around the table.
actually, yeah, just go back to the beginning at this point.
So, but I do a Clause 4. Yeah, thank you. Okay. All right. Shall Clause 1 carry? Carried. Okay, new Clause 1.1 takes us to G1, moved by Ms. Latanzio. Shall G1 carry? Carried. Thank you. Okay. Hold on. Yeah, I can't see. So G1 carry, I did that already, right?
So then new Clause 1.
Okay, new Clause 1.2 takes us to G2, moved by Ms. Latanzio. Shall G2 carry? Okay, shall G2...
And then it's Clause 2, G3.
Okay, okay, thank you. Clause 2 is, takes us to G3, moved by Ms. Latanzio. Shall G3 carry? Yes. Shall Clause 2 carry? Yes. Carried. Shall Clause 3 carry? Yes.
G4 we've already done, so you can do G5.
Yeah, G4 we've done already, okay. So now we're into G5, moved by Ms. Latanzio. Shall G5 carry? Yes. Shall Clause 4 carry? Yes. Carried. So new Clause 5, which takes us to G6, Ms. Latanzio. Moved by Ms. Latanzio. Shall G6 carry? Yes. Carried. Which takes us to new Clause 6 and G7. Moved by Ms. Latanzio. Shall G7 carry? Yes. Okay.
And short title.
Yeah. Shall the short title carry? Yes. Carried. Shall the title carry? Yes. Carried. Shall the bill as amended carry? Yes. Carried. Okay.
Shall the chair report the bill to the House?
Thank you. Shall the chair report the bill to the House as amended? Yes. Shall the committee order a reprint of the bill as amended for the use of the House at the report stage? Yes. Yes, carried. Okay. That takes care of that. Before we adjourn, we have two budgets. Just one moment, which I can't read.
239 and 235.
The budgets for 231 and 235, which were previously circulated. Can I get a, does everybody agree with these budgets? Pass these, adopt these budgets? Yes, yes, okay, both approved. Thank you.
Idée de sur quoi on va être lundi?
What will we be doing on Monday?
Sorry, Mr. Fortin, can you repeat that, please?
Je veux pas vous
Well, not to get ahead of you, but before adjournment, I just wanted to ask if you have an idea of what we'll be doing on Monday.
I'm happy to answer that question after the meeting. I'm not in a position to answer it right now. Okay. Mr. Baber.
Unfortunately, Mr. Kibble had to leave. On behalf of Mr. Kibble, just wanted to thank everyone here for allowing for the swift passage of this bill. Thank you to the government for working with us, and to the officials. Thank you very much for your very competent work and figuring out the mechanics as to how to make it happen. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you to the justice.
Thank you, Mr. Baber.
Thank you.
I will echo those comments and thank all the committee members too for being so efficient with this bill. And on that note, I will adjourn the meeting.
Yeah. No.